Hey, y'all, and welcome to the Healthy by Heather Brown podcast, where I encourage you in healthy mind, body, and spirit through my Sunday reset. Let's get into it. Hey, girl gang, and welcome back to the Healthy by Heather Brown show. Today, we are in for a treat because we get to talk to Ian Crone, who is the best-selling author, speaker, and you've probably heard of his book, The Road Back to You, but he actually has a new book coming out called The Fix: How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. He is also a psychotherapist. He is married to Anne, his wife, in Nashville, just about 3 hours away from me in Birmingham. And so with all that said, Ian, we are so excited to have you today. How are you doing?
Thanks, Heather. I'm glad to be here. I'm doing well.
Awesome. So glad to hear it. So tell us a little bit about where you got your start in Enneagram, and then what has led you to writing your latest book. I just think it's such a fascinating journey. You were one of my first big introductions to the Enneagram, so I'm just fascinated by the whole concept.
Yeah. So my first introduction to the Enneagram was I was in graduate school studying to become a psychotherapist, and I happened upon a book on the Enneagram, and I remember reading it and thinking to myself, holy smokes, where has this been? You know, I've been studying human development and abnormal psychology and all these other important topics. But I thought, this is an amazing, weirdly accurate depiction of the inner architecture of different kinds of people that could be really useful to people.
Absolutely. And then you started to share some about it, and, you know, you were learning so much. So then what led you to actually then be like, I want to write a book on this? And then how has your journey kept changing and led to now The Fix?
Well, I mean, it's like serendipity, right? I had written 2 books already, and I was under pressure from my agent to write another book. And I just was like, I can't think of anything, because I don't get interested in writing a book until something really makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. You know what I mean? Like, I've really got to be inspired. And I was at a stop sign in Franklin, Tennessee.
Oh, I love Franklin. It's the cutest.
Yeah. And I was just sitting there, and, people were always buzzy about the Enneagram and stuff. And I went, wait a minute. No one's written a book on this topic for like 30 years. And I just, all of a sudden, I realized there's an open 5-lane highway here. And I also felt like no one has written it in the kind of voice that I write with. Most Enneagram books, many are incredible and they're really content rich, but they're pretty dry and clinical. And I'm like, what if I just wrote an introduction to the Enneagram that was also enjoyable to read, filled with stories and anecdotes, but also enough meat on the bone that people walked away feeling like, oh, I got my money's worth. I really understand this thing. And that was the beginning of that. As to the new book, The Fix, I mean, look, here's why I was born. Okay. Just in a nutshell, right?
Let's hear it.
I was born to introduce people to ideas and experiences that deepen and improve their lives. Mm-hmm. And the Enneagram falls into that category. And my own experience as a person in recovery, I just one day realized, similarly, there's really no book introducing just regular people to the 12 steps, people beyond people in recovery, that they could realize, oh, wait a minute, this could be for me too. Like, I could really derive the same benefits from working the 12 steps that people in the rooms of recovery experience regularly. And I just don't know of a more transformational program of living than the 12 steps. And I wanted to democratize it. I want everybody to have a shot at experiencing the kind of change I've experienced as a result of working those steps.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, do you mind expounding a little bit on what you were recovering from? Was it alcohol? Was it something different?
Yeah. I'm an everythingaholic at my core. If you give me anything that's mood altering, and I'll find a way to do it all the time. I mean, Yes, my first journey into recovery began with alcohol in 1987, later with prescription medications. And, I could go into more detail about that, but what's important to know is that I really don't have a lot of regrets about any of it because what I've gotten from it and mostly from working the 12 steps has been such an enormous help, blessing, if I can use that word,
Yeah.
to me and actually through me to others, right? Like, so I just get stoked talking about it.
That's amazing. I love it so much. Well, Ian, you can definitely use the term blessing here. And since you said that, I do also want to point out that I know some of my mamas that listen to this, you might be like, oh, I don't know about the Enneagram. Like I'm a little bit like, whoa. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to refer you back to the show notes. I've actually had another Enneagram expert on to talk about how she views the Enneagram in light of the Bible and for believers, because I know a lot of us here are Christians and that's something that we are unsure about. So everybody obviously has their own different belief systems, but I really did hammer into that whole topic with her there. So I'm going to link back to that. And I don't want to get too much into that with Ian here today. But Ian, I did mention that you're married to Anne, and I have to imagine that, you have a lot to share too with just what you've learned in your marriage through some of these 12 steps. And I mean, obviously, I think most people at this point know that you have to have a great marriage, you have to constantly be working on yourself. It's not like there's not just that something's always wrong with your spouse. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how long you've been married to Anne, and then also what it's been like for her on this journey with you through these years? I just love learning from people's wisdom.
Yeah, so we've been married almost 40 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we've been with each other, and that doesn't include the dating years. So, I mean, what a life partner. We've had many, I often like to say that I've been married several times to the same person, which happens in a marriage, right? Like
Yes.
you don't get married once to somebody. There's seasons where there has to be a renegotiation of the contract between you. And, when the script changes, and it needs to change as new experiences and new seasons come in. And we've managed to navigate that over the years. And both the Enneagram and the 12 steps have been really formative for us and have really blessed our marriage in very, very profound ways. My wife is involved in a 12-step program for people who are married or are parents of people with addictions. She regularly goes to those meetings. I regularly go to mine. And we are big believers that what makes a marriage work is when two people independent of each other work on themselves.
Yes. So good.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, as a therapist, when people ask me, should we do couples therapy? I'm like, why don't you start with individual therapy first? And don't think about fixing the other person. Focus on fixing what needs fixing in your life first.
Oh, that's really good, Ian. When you did first start going to therapy, I assume did you start before she did with the 12 steps tech program?
Yes.
Okay.
And I was the first one to go to therapy very early, probably when I was 23. My wife, many years later, she came late to that party, but went willing and open to what God had for her in that experience.
Yeah, that's amazing. And will you tell everybody what is your Enneagram number if they don't know, and what is Anne's Enneagram number?
Yeah, I'm a self-preservation 4 on the Enneagram, and my wife is a 1-to-1 9.
4 and a 9. Is that a fairly common pairing? Do you feel like in marriage or not really? Or is there like a most common paired couple that tends to happen with Enneagram numbers?
People ask me all the time, is there, I'm a 3, is there a good number that I should watch out for that would be a good match for me? And I'm like, yeah, any 2 numbers can be great on the Enneagram, to the degree that each of them is doing their own individual work. If only one is, it creates a kind of stress in the relationship. If one person's growing and the other one isn't, that's automatically creating distance, right? And so you really want 2 people side by side growing and learning about themselves, and that illuminates what's happening in the marriage.
Yes,
right?
that's good. Yeah.
And so, I'd say one coupling that I see all the time for some reason is 9s and 1s. 9s and 1s often go together.
Okay.
It's crazy.
Well, I know a 9 and a 1. So that's interesting. Like, they immediately came to mind when you said that. And out of selfishness, I want to tell you what me and my husband's numbers are and see kind of like what feedback you might have for us. I'm going to get telling myself a little bit. You guys, I was listening to another podcast episode that Ian did on marriage just to kind of get my thoughts flowing about some things that we might want to talk about. And I immediately text my husband because I was like, I know that we know this about ourselves, but it's also just interesting to hear it in light of the Enneagram. And so I told him, I said, so the author of The Road Back to You just said on a podcast that 3s, 7s, and 8s orientation of time is the future, AKA always dreaming about the future. So for me, I'm always like, where are we going to travel next? What are we going to do? And then I said, I can't remember what the third number was you said, but you said 5s, 6s, and one other number's orientation is primarily to the past. I said, that's so interesting because 5s have to know that 3s are just dreaming. And I don't necessarily want you to figure out how to do it ASAP when I tell you that I want to live on more land or have a mini farm one day or travel, et cetera, et cetera. His response was, trust me, I figured that out. You have caused me to be more of a dreamer.
So it sounds like you're a 7.
Well, you know what? I welcome your feedback. My friends are all like, you have to be a 7. And everybody that works with me is like, you have to be a 3. So when I read, I've heard that, and you, again, I welcome your feedback, Ian. But when I read what to do when you're torn between 2 that you score high on, to read the negatives of both, and whichever one, you're like, oh, gut punch. I read the struggles that the 3 typically has, and I literally wanted to crawl under a rock. So I think I'm probably a 3, but.
Okay, well, let's just run with that. So 3, 7s, and 8s are the most assertive numbers on the Enneagram, and they are more future-oriented than they are present or past-oriented. 4s, 5s, and 9s are more past-oriented, and 1s, 2s, and 6s are just more present-oriented. Now, that doesn't mean that we all don't have a relationship with all 3 time frames, right? Past,
Sure.
Present, future. It's just that some people camp out more in one than they do in the other 2. And actually, when you know that you're a very future-oriented or future-minded person, what that does is it presents you with a really great growth challenge, which is, how do I stay present and not always be in the future in my head and in my body? And how do I learn from the past and not, ignore it or run from it or not deal with the past? And to bring those things into alignment with each other, I think that's a really healthy way to be in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about, for fun, again, like I said, for me, when you think about a 3 and a 5 together, what do you typically try to pull out in that relationship or ask them to think about as far as, ways to grow together and to continue on that, positive, I guess, trajectory in their marriage? And just for your background, Ian, we've been married now for 16 years. So I always tell people our marriage is old enough to drive.
Right. There you go. Right. Mine's old enough to retire.
Too good.
So, I think a couple of things come to mind off the top of my head. Well, one is you have a much faster processor than your husband does. It doesn't mean it's more accurate. It just means that you are a pretty fast thinking. You sometimes get out over your skis. And so, whereas your husband is a more deliberate thinker, it takes more time for him because, 5s just have a lot of folders they have to search through in their heads, right? So, like, I'm always telling 3s and 7s, other types, like when you ask a 5 a question, you got to take a pause and just wait. And don't get nervous about the silence. Their search engine is running for the answer. And they also don't want to have the wrong answer. They want the answer to be well reasoned and thought through. So it's like, give them time, just give them space. Secondly, your husband's very private and he needs alone time to charge. You are probably more extroverted than he is.
1,000.
Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah. And you probably get a lot of energy from being with people, not as much as a 2 would, but you like to be with people and you get energy from being with them. I mean, I can just tell in our call right here, right? Just from your affect, the way that your body language is, your husband's body language and his affect would be flatter than yours.
Oh my gosh, yes.
right? And
Yeah.
so that's how I know when I'm, here's the cool thing about the Enneagram. If you work with it long enough, as long as I have, you really start to be able to pick up on things in people really fast. And therefore, you can begin to make accommodations. You know what I mean? Like, I just know how to love people faster because I can observe what's going on and be like, oh, so this is probably, or it looks like maybe I'm talking with a 5. You know what I mean? Like, you're probably a hugger.
Yep.
Right?
Classic
Okay.
Southern hugger. Yep.
All right, you're a classic Southern hugger, and your husband is probably a little bit more tense about touch from other people. I would just know that off the top of my head. You know what I mean? I'd be like, okay, I'm not going to go over and hug that guy because it's probably going to be uncomfortable for him.
But
until I get to know him.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But you might be just immediate, right? Like, oh, hey, and just, whatever. So your husband is, that 3-5 combination can be really, really healthy and really great. It's just to the degree that the two of you are doing your own work. And you have to give him more space, more time, and help him to really get in touch with his emotions, his feelings. But you have to be patient because a 5 typically has to think his way to his feelings. Like, you probably, if I gave you a gift right now, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I can't believe it. You'd be tearing the paper off and looking at the gift and being like, you'd probably get a little puddly, you get a little teary, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you got me a gift. And if I gave the same gift to your husband, his response would be more muted. Right.
Yes.
And he'd be like, oh, well, thank you. You're going,
and
more? Could you give me a little bit more? And you just learn, nope, that's just how they are. They oftentimes can take them a couple of days before they kind of process and think through the gift before they have maybe a more deeper expression of gratitude, right? Or not, they're just run at a cooler emotional temperature than other types. And you can't, the beautiful thing about the Enneagram is all of a sudden, none of this stuff is personal anymore. It's just recognizing differences.
Yeah.
And baking them into your calculations as you do your marriage.
Yeah. So, Ian, when you're talking like this, so I feel like it's cool that people got to hear insights on me and Eric's type, so they can probably relate to parts of it that maybe go with their numbers or what have you. Do you mind talking a little bit through some of you and Anne's struggles in your numbers and some of the ways that you combat those, maybe even on is it a weekly basis? Is it a monthly basis so that they can hear other numbers and how that could potentially personally help them as well?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is when we first discovered the Enneagram, we were kind of in a rough patch of time. And, 40 years of marriage, you're going to have rough patches, right? And when we discovered the Enneagram, it was like scales falling from our eyes. It was like, oh my gosh, this is why we are having these struggles. And we had such an awakening of empathy and compassion, understanding, a sense of humor came into the equation in a way that was really wonderful. And it also gave us a path of growth that we could get to work on. So, a 4 and a 9, those are pretty different numbers, right? Like a 4 is, we are disproportionately represented in creative fields, the arts. We're people who are very attuned to our emotions. We are quirky and highly empathic. And when we're not very healthy in our personality, we can be self-absorbed, melancholy, dramatic, and a little angsty. You know what I mean? Just like angsty.
Yeah.
9s are what you see is what you get people. 4s, we think, are the most complex number on the Enneagram. And I don't say that as a way to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying all Enneagram teachers I know will tell you 4s are deep wells. And just when you think you get to the bottom of them, you realize there is no bottom. So 9s, on the other hand, when I say they're the least complex number on the Enneagram, that doesn't mean they're simple. It just means that they're what you see is what you get people. With 4s, what you see is never what you get. You know what I mean? Like there's always more. So it's been a really wonderful thing to be married to a 9 because Annie is a very, she's a very low maintenance, easygoing, non-confrontational, lover, incredibly supportive, empathic, cares deeply about my children. I mean, the list of things about her that are amazing is too long to enumerate on your show.
If you are loving everything you're hearing here in this episode about mind, body, and spirit health, how they're all interconnected, my tested and proven Sunday reset method, and leaving a healthy legacy for your kids, you need to join the Healthy by Heather Brown membership. It's a community of like-minded women seeking the Lord and better health with weekly resources where I get to personally cheer you on. You get 7 days free to test it out. Link to join in the show notes or go to healthybyheatherbrown.com.
But when we learned about each other's, and I remember the night my wife read her the type description she was in bed before I was, and she was reading about nines, and she just wept. She just wept. She goes, "Oh, finally, someone is expressing someone is finally saying clearly what I always felt vaguely about myself, but I didn't have the words for, and now I can give them to you, and vice versa." So huge. Now, we don't talk about the Enneagram all the time, but
Sure.
but it does come up. And, sometimes Annie will be doing something and she gets distracted and she goes off to something else, leaving the previous job unfinished. And I'll be like, "I'm feeling a little 90 in the air." And she'll laugh. Sometimes it causes a bit of annoyance, but it is true, right? Like,
Yeah.
That's a typical pattern with nines. And sometimes she might tell me, like, "You need to stop taking things so personally." That's a very four thing. And it's just good that we have those insights into each other, that we both agree are issues for us. And boy, I mean, if I'd had the Enneagram before I got married, it would have saved us a lot of time and heartache.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I wish we would have too. I really kind of found it, I would say around like 2018 or 2019. And then we actually deep dived through your book in a women's Bible study in 2019 and kind of bleeding over into the start of 2020. And so I've been fascinated ever since. But I do think that one of the really unique things about you coming on this season of the podcast is that you're one of the people that I'm interviewing that has been married the longest. So I just want to ask you the age-old question. What is one of your best pieces of marriage advice, or how do you even think Anne would answer that question as well?
Wow. So many things I could say.
Well, I won't limit you. I'm like, go on and on if you want to.
Well, a couple of things. One is, faith is very important to us. And so having a healthy spiritual life and to do the inner work of the spiritual life is really, really important. To cultivate humility, patience, kindness, compassion, gentleness, honesty. You just can't practice these things enough. In many ways, marriage is the crucible in which the human heart is formed. Which isn't to say that if you're not married, you can't have the same experience. It's just going to be through some other mechanism. But when you're living with somebody and raising children with somebody and facing sickness with other people, with them, and facing all manner of things, it's just this beautiful crucible in which, you are tested and developed, and it's an amazing school with a hard curriculum. And, so I think, a healthy spiritual life, doing your own inner work, also learning to be two independent individuals that are not, like sometimes when I hear people say things like, "Oh, this is my better half," I go, "That's sick."
You're like, wait a minute, let's really think about that though.
I mean, listen, because if someone's my better half, that means I'm looking for them to complete me. And the moment you look to another human being to complete you, you're in trouble. Right? That's called codependency and enmeshment. And you just do not want to have that. What you want are two whole people who have elected to go through life interdependently, not dependently. Does that make sense?
Well, I actually really like that. And you're making me think about how one of the things that I feel like I learn over and over again is that a lot of times when I'm annoyed with Eric or when we're at odds with each other or little things are bothering me, what I'm ultimately realizing is that I'm actually looking for Eric to fill that God-sized hole inside my heart. And maybe I haven't been in communication with my Heavenly Father or haven't been as fulfilled in my spirit, like we're talking about. And then I'm putting that expectation on a human, my husband, which he can never fulfill that. And so I think that you're putting it very much so in counseling terms, the way that I feel when I can self-recognize that that's going on.
Well, in 12-step rooms, and I think I might mention this in the book, The Fix, is we often say expectations are resentments waiting to happen.
Yeah, I like that.
And I think that's true, not just about our partners, but about life in general, right? Like there's so little we have control over in this life. And, to have too many expectations, unreasonable, or even too many reasonable ones, you're just setting yourself up to be resentful when they're not fulfilled. Right. And versus being more open-handed and, just realizing in relationships, this other person cannot possibly fulfill all your needs. And in fact, they're not responsible for your happiness. That's your job. That's your job.
Yes.
Not theirs. And the moment you place those expectations consciously or unconsciously on somebody, you're setting yourself up for resentment.
That's good stuff. When you're talking, I feel like there's going to be women that are listening to this, Ian, that are going to be like, oh, I really do struggle with with resentment for my husband for a lot of different things. What are some of the first steps that they can take to, walk away from that resentment?
So let's just define resentment, right? Resentment is feeling a slight or an offense or a wound repeatedly in the present moment, though it happened, days ago, weeks ago, months, years, decades, right? Like you're just still carrying around the charge of that experience, the pain of that experience, as though it happened a minute ago, right? You're just reliving, you're recycling it over and over and over again. And, I feel like, well, the 12 steps, actually in the 5th step of the 12 steps, there's a whole exercise around resentments, right? Which is write down the names of the people that you're resentful toward. Why in the next column. Then in the next column, how it affected you, right? And then in the final column, and this is the most important and the most difficult column, is to say, and what was my part? Because oftentimes we villainize or completely blame someone else for a wound that we experienced as a result of some interaction with them, right? Or some failure on their part. And the fact of the matter is, whenever we're disturbed, there's something also wrong with us, right? And in my experience, when I've done resentment work, getting to that 4th column and realizing, oh, well, actually, this is my part in what went wrong. And what that does is it kind of softens my heart and sets the ground for me letting go of that resentment, like just owning my piece, just own my piece of what went wrong. And then all of a sudden that person doesn't, number one, have all the power over you. Now you've got some power to do something about it. Like, oh, this is what I did. It gives you an opportunity, if necessary, to go back and make amends to them for your part of what went wrong without naming their mistakes, just owning your part.
Yes.
That's called sweeping your side. That's right. That's called sweeping your side of the street, not theirs, yours.
Yeah.
Right. What they do with it, that's fine. That's their business, but just cleaning your side of the street. And that too, that's actually step 9 in the 12 steps. And so that's a really good way to start dealing with and resolving old resentments. And most people have oodles of resentments. They just have never really sat down and sort of like written them out.
Yeah, that's so true. You're making me think about, I did this entire grief workbook and they also used the 12 steps to walk you through it. And so I'm thinking, man, I really need to come back to those 12 steps though, about just so many things like resentment or like things in my past or what have you. Cause like we talked about, I don't really like to hang out in my past. So yeah, that's really good encouragement for me. And if you guys are hearing this and you're thinking, man, I've never done an exercise like that, don't worry. I'm going to be linking Ian's new book down in the show notes. So you guys can click to order it and get that in your hands so you can start to learn more about this. Ian, I know that we're quickly running out of time, so I want to be respectful of your time. And one of the things that you were talking about, though, when you said things that you and your wife really focus on in your marriage, it made me think about this Bible verse. And so I want to read it. Most of you guys are probably going to know it, but it's Galatians 5:22 through 23. I think you talked so much about the fruits of the spirit, and that's what you're trying to cultivate in you and Anne, like in your own personal journey and with the Lord. But it says, but the fruit of the spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things, there is no law. And so, Girl Gang, as you're listening to this today, I would just encourage you to think about some of the things that Ian shared today, and maybe even just get out a notebook and start to write down those columns and fill them out and think about ways that maybe you do resent your husband or yourself or your family, and then really go to the Lord and go open-handedly and say, what can we do here together to help me find some resolve to these issues, and then also to let that impact my marriage going forward.
Yeah, in fact, the book comes with a workbook and all these things are in it, where it's like in the book, I walk people through using humor, funny stories. It's also very transparent and vulnerable. I share a lot about my own story. And I want to make it clear to people, you don't have to be someone who identifies as an addict or an alcoholic or anything like that. The 12 steps derived from a Christian organization called the Oxford Movement 90 years ago. So there's everything about them is continuous with the gospel. There's not a thing in the 12 steps that, in fact, I'd say the 12 steps will make you a better follower of Jesus than just about anything.
Oh, wow.
I mean, as a system of living, as a program, as a design for living.
Wow.
And every step is designed to bring you into a closer relationship with God than you've ever had before. That's the purpose, actually, of the 12 steps. People think it's to help people stop drinking, it's to help people stop, taking drugs or overeating or, being codependent and all these other things. It's like, no, that's actually just the start. Mm-hmm. What they're really designed to do is to facilitate a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it renders all of your crazy behaviors unnecessary. Like you will no longer default to your lunacy, and you will begin to live a more Christ-centered, compassionate, peaceful life. I mean, if anyone's looking for peace, like you ought to check out the 12 steps. I don't know why it's not sort of a curriculum. I mean, some churches use it, but I wish more would use it as a curriculum for just regular everyday people to say, oh, you're looking for peace and you're looking for joy and you're looking for healing and you're looking for life. Look no further. Like, here's a program for living that will give you all that.
Wow. Yeah. I'm like, churches, if you're listening to this, or pastors' wives, pass it along to your church staff. That's good stuff. Ian, I'm going to ask you the closing question that I ask every guest that comes on the show. And it is, how do you and Anne reset? How do you reset as a couple? We talk a lot here just about what that looks like in mind, body, and spirit health. But specifically this season, I'm asking how you guys reset in your marriage.
Yeah, great question. Well, one is we both are actively involved in our 12-step communities where we are just regularly given the most amazing wisdom from the weirdest of sources. I mean, sometimes a 22-year-old will say something in a meeting. I'll be like, where did you get that? You know what I mean? And I'll be like, how is it possible that you knew that? Like I am old enough to be your grandfather. And here I am sitting at your feet and learning. You know what I mean?
Oh, good. Yeah.
Both of us are active in therapy. We are interested in growing in our own self-understanding. And so there's a real focus on, continual growth, right? Until the end. We're just going to continue to work on our own growth. We're regular church people, so we are actively engaged there. And I'll tell you something else that's wonderful is that Annie hasn't worked for a lot of years. And we've chosen to live in a smaller home than we need to. So we're just with each other a lot. Yeah. But we also know when to move away from each other to recharge through other relationships and to not think for a moment, oh, I expect you to fulfill everything in my life. No, I have outside relationships with other guys that feed parts of my soul that Annie can't possibly feed. And by the way, we're health nuts. So, I mean, like we are really concerned with taking care of our bodies. So I meet with a trainer 5 days a week, and Annie is out actually right now. She goes to hot yoga 5 days a week, 4 days a week, and she plays pickleball.
Wow.
She's wickedly competitive. And it's the kind of thing where paying attention to our bodies really matters to us. And we just enjoy feeling healthy and able to do things actually that most people our age can't do. And
Huge.
yeah, we really care about the body, the spirit, and the mind and the heart. And we pay attention to all four.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Ian, you're like totally speaking my love language. I'm like, man, now I wish I could have you on for another hour just talk about mind, body, and spirit health. But like maybe next season we'll do that.
Yeah.
So Ian, tell everybody just one more time where they can find your book, where they can connect with you online, anything else that you'd like to share with everybody.
Thank you. So the name of the book is The Fix: How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. And it is, again, this exploration of the 12 steps of recovery for everybody. Because actually, I hope everyone's in recovery. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, that would be a good thing. Right. And it's fun. It's very self-disclosing. There are parts that'll make you laugh out loud and parts that'll make you cry. And it's also very practical and down to earth. They can get it right now on Amazon. Right? Just go to Amazon and pump in Ian Cron, C-R-O-N, and up it'll come. And my website is ianmorgancron.com, and at Ian Morgan Cron is across all my socials.
Amazing. Well, Ian, thank you so much for coming on today. Girl Gang, thank you so much for tuning in. I can't wait to see y'all back next Tuesday. And I hope that this left you inspired. I hope that you get Ian's book and that you really start to dive into those 12 steps. And I know that I can't wait to read it myself as well. See y'all next time. Bye. Hey, Girl Gang. We are back in the Marriage Corner, and we actually get to take one of your questions. So, Eric, do you want to read the question from Sarah?
Sure, I've got it right here. Got both of our phones out. But also, too, I got to shout out the sign. I love the sign that Heather has up here. It's Healthy by Heather Brown. Also, too, just kind of, Heather and I were just talking before we came on, but just a real quick funny story. It's probably just funny to us, but anyways.
Hey, before you tell the story, if you're just listening to this and you're not watching it, the signs is new, and it's one of those pink, what do you call it?
It's a neon sign.
A neon sign, and it says Healthy by Heather Brown above our heads. So this is the first time we're recording with Eric with the new desk setup and the signs, so we're very excited. But go ahead.
It looks great. But
Thanks.
Anyways, Heather's office is upstairs. And I just went around the corner. Our boys' bedrooms are right around the corner as well, too. And they're not the cleanest right now, I will say. I don't know if anybody else struggles with that. But anyways, that's a task to do this weekend. But our youngest son, Finn, 6 years old, he loves to build. And we have these little connecting blocks, and they're actually just little individual pieces, but you can make blocks out of them. And every time I go into his bathroom, that's where he builds everything. He builds everything when he's in the bathroom. Now I can kind of relate, you go to the restroom, use the restroom, and you're sitting there on your phone playing. I guess maybe like that's his equivalent, but it's like really intricate, detailed like builds that he does. But also too, I just walk in there, I almost trip over all these blocks just right in front of his sink, in front of the toilet, by the trash can, everywhere. I find it incredibly funny.
Yes, for sure. And I told Eric, I think his reasoning is that Finn usually wakes up before Leighton. So I think he goes into their Jack and Jill bathroom to build them. So that as soon as Leighton wakes up and goes to the bathroom, Finn knows he's awake and can have him play with him.
That's probably right. He does wake up earlier than Leighton, and I do think he waits for him. But sorry, back to the question from Sarah. It's a very good question. What surprised you the most about marriage once you got further and further into it? So I think we both have had a little time to think about this, but what are your initial thoughts on that question, Heather?
My initial thoughts are that I don't really know if we're going to put this Marriage Corner with the episode where this quote is listed or if it'll come later or earlier, but there is a quote that says something along the lines of, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but that 100% of people that get married marry different people, and 50% of people that get married, marry multiple people. So the thought process is that people change over time. So like the Eric I married at 22 is obviously not the same as Eric at 39. And so as you change, like you do basically have to like grow with that person. So I think we could answer, how did we feel like it changed initially? What was the biggest changes as we got further into our relationship, and maybe the most surprising things now?
Yeah, sorry. I think I think I kind of got a little bit confused when you were talking about marrying different people and you're so
I'll look up the quote.
sorry. I'm not usually I feel like we're tracking pretty well, but I kind of
I'll look up the
I
quote.
kind of blanked out right there. But I do think a little bit along the same lines. I had a similar thought process, but mine was mainly just having to do with perspective. And I can't remember when I was taking the kids to school today, I was thinking, I can't remember specifically what it was, but I was thinking just basically back to when the kids were first born and I was actually just praying with the kids in the car. I was like, hey, what are you guys thankful for today? And this is kind of rambling as well too, but anyways, back to perspective, like you were talking about early on in our marriage, I don't think I would ever have expected where our marriage is today when it was when we first got married when we were 22 years old. There's just no way that you can predict when you're newly married what your marriage or what your life is going to look like 15, 16, 25 years down the road. We've been married for 16 years, and just how you were talking about how both of our personalities have changed, how different values have changed a little bit as well too. I think that's what surprised me the most is that I could just have never have dreamed how our marriage has changed and evolved and how much it's changed, all in a good way. And I would almost compare it to, people always talk about what's your favorite age of what your kids are, and people always say, well, each stage is my favorite. There's different things I love about when they're an infant, when they're a toddler, when they're, in fifth grade, middle school, high school, probably eventually in college, it'll be the same way. But I kind of feel the exact same way. Early on in our marriage, there were things that I loved, but also too, I love where our marriage is at right now. And I think it's the best it probably ever has been. But maybe you can think of like a specific way that as our marriage has gone over time, that it's surprised. Do you have any specifics?
Yeah, so I will say that I always joke that, when Eric and I first got married, I did not realize that he would be traveling so much for work. So I always joke that, I didn't know when we got married I needed a roommate because you weren't home very much because you traveled so much for work. And so I think that there was a lot of hardship that came in that we weren't expecting. And then that led to, and we may have talked about this before, but I love physical touch. So I love it when Eric holds my hand, if he kisses me on the forehead, if I just want to know that he notices me. So even today, you walk by in the bathroom and you patted my butt. I appreciate that kind of thing. But when we would get together when we were first dating, we would always be together, sitting side by side, watching a movie, holding hands, and we're walking, all the things. Do you remember when we first got married and I wanted to still do that every time that you came home from work and you were kind of like, whoa, why are you right by me all the time?
I do remember it was a very small couch in our very small condo, and did not like my job at the time, and probably just needed a little bit of space. But I was thinking of the exact same thing, because as we've been married for longer periods of time, a lot of those things, I still want to do those things, and I still enjoy doing those things in personal touch and things of that nature. But also too, I was thinking about a lot of times, you almost felt like you had to just say exactly how you felt or just communicate more strictly when you were first married. Whereas now we still love to communicate and we'll bring things up. But a lot of times I feel like I can almost think what you're thinking even before you're thinking it. And a lot of times those things don't even need to be said. And that's just how we've grown closer together. But for the big issues, we're still going to talk about those things. But early on in the marriage, if you're not saying specifically, what you feel or what your plan is, I'd encourage anyone to over communicate when you're newly married, just so you can learn each other's expectations and grow closer together.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And even communication to this day, I think, is so important, and we can take it for granted when we get busy. Will you give the example of what you told me last Friday? Because we were supposed to record a marriage corner and you came to me and you were honest, and I really appreciated it. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about that communication?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. But before we recorded a couple of the podcasts, we both have been very busy. Work's been very busy for me. Obviously, this is Heather's busiest time of the year. But I said, hey, I'm all for doing these podcasts, but I honestly, I feel like we don't feel very close. I don't feel very close to you right now. And I say, I understand. I know that's a lot of the circumstances we're with. But let's still do this. And I think you and I both felt much closer after we did the podcast, and because it's something we're sharing and something we're doing together. But yeah, I think you appreciated it. But early on in our marriage, I definitely would not have been like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And because, I think a lot of men, they almost feel like, it's almost like a little bit of lack of self-worth, or you're not confident in yourself. But to really be comfortable with yourself and share your feelings at the right time, I mean, you don't have to do it all the time, is appropriate. And I think that's healthy as well, too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something Eric and I will probably talk about in another episode of the Marriage Corner during this season, because that is just a huge part of marriage, is that communication, that willingness to talk. And I have to apologize because I have been so distracted trying to find this quote on my phone and I can't find it. So I'm just going to wait and do it at the end, and I'll record it so you guys can hear it.
So can I give my specific example how it surprised me? Our marriage is...
Yes, please.
All right. So you did mention physical touch, and I did mention as well, too, I'm going to try and keep this succinct, about how when you're first married together, I feel like a lot of times people are still trying to figure out who they are, what values are most important to them. And I know for me personally, early on in our marriage in 22, and I think most people when they're 22, out throughout their 20s are still trying to figure out who they really are. And a lot of times there's a lot of self-doubt and a lot of lacking in self-confidence. I think most people have those issues. And I definitely had those things. I was trying to figure out what job was best for me, but also too, and I think you're going to appreciate this. I'm going to bring this all back. And you've also mentioned, Eric, I think people really want us to talk more about our sex life.
It's true. That was a top request from you guys.
So you know what? We're going to go there right now. All right.
Gosh,
so, I mean, I feel like we have a very healthy sex life. So appreciative for it. But also too, early on in our marriage, this is probably one of the areas that surprised me the most is that, if someone is lacking self-confidence, or they're not like really sure, with who they are, sometimes I feel like that can cause just a little bit of reservations in someone's sex life. And I think as our marriage has progressed, we communicate so much more. We also learn what each person, likes. And, I think we're much more open with, hey, like, and also being spontaneous, but overall just being comfortable with each other. And, I feel like our sex life is better than it ever has been. And I think a lot of that is just kind of like how you're talking about. It's the whole progression of our relationship, our marriage, growing closer together in communication, growing closer together in our faith, just being comfortable with each other. And yeah, that's what surprised me the most. A lot of people they're like, oh yeah, things will get stale in your marriage. Nope. Probably not stale at all. So I encourage people to, if you go through some like dry spells, wait it out, communicate more, and be willing to be open and honest with your partner, your spouse, and see what happens.
But Eric, I would say though too, to your point, because I'm like specifically, if they're listening to this thing and like specifically though, how did it get better? I would say that you will say to me things that you want to try that maybe you wouldn't have said before. Yeah. I think specifically that's what has changed it.
Yeah, I think definitely that's true. I didn't want to go into specific details, and I probably won't. But
no, don't go into very specific.
Not going into specific details, but yes, I completely agree. But I think you're the same way as well too. Like, just being open and honest with, your preferences and your desires, things of that nature, and I think that's perfectly healthy.
Definitely agree. So don't be afraid to tell your partner like, hey, I think this would be really fun to try. Or like Eric has said that to me before. And at first I kind of was like, whoa, I don't know about that. But I think I literally was like, could I have something to drink before we try that? So like, just don't be afraid to like, do what you need to do to loosen up a little bit, I guess.
So mine's kind of running right now.
Oh,
and
no.
I think you're looking really good right now, and the kids aren't in the house. So I'm thinking after we, complete this in maybe the next 20 seconds, we just, there's a couch right over there. But anyways, we're talking about being open and honest. I'm just saying.
Too open and honest, Eric. You crossed the line for the podcast. Okay. So anything else though that you want to talk about that has changed our marriage that you didn't expect before we close out for real?
I just think just in general, it's just, how our expectations, I always go back to this. We always talk about communicating, and the more you communicate, the more expectations are met. And typically where people or relationships have disagreements is when expectations aren't met. You think, oh, this person's going to do this. But if you don't communicate to them your expectations, they don't necessarily know that. And that can cause a lot of friction. So just continue to communicate. And, I think we had mentioned too that we have another podcast where we want to talk about sometimes where husbands don't open up as much as their wives would like them to. And we'll touch more about that. Sometimes it's really more just about being patient, for whether it's the husband or the wife, being patient and willing to wait for the person to feel comfortable, but also letting them know, like, hey, I want to know how you're feeling. And just being patient, because sometimes maybe they're not ready. But I'm so glad that you continue to surprise me in our relationships in numerous different ways. And I'm looking forward to a lot of surprises in 2025.
That's right. That's right. And I will close out and say, too, that one of the things I think that surprised me the most was how much more confident I felt after having kids in relation to sex. Like, obviously in the beginning, after you have kids, you're like, my body's a war zone. I can't have sex for 6 weeks. Like, you just feel so disconnected. And then you're touched out and like kids are nursing on your boobs and you just feel like I am so unsexy. I just feel so like, ugh. So for the women listening to this, know that that was not an immediate shift. It's like, I feel like once our kids got a little bit older, I wasn't as touched out all the time, is when I felt like we got more confident and better at communicating what we wanted. And I even had the like mental space to process that, perhaps. And also I would say that one thing that has surprised me is, whereas before, I think that you and I would have just held resentment and let things build and build and build, and then eventually like just be like, well, I'm mad because like an exploding. I think.
So to be fair, that was me like 98% of the time in our early marriage. It really typically wasn't Heather.
Well, I wouldn't explode, but I would be more so just like holding grudges or like, what do you say? Like,
you just want to communicate as much as you always do, which is like a ton of communication. So like a little less communication from you was like, this is weird.
Right. And it was because I let resentments build up. And so I think that really, as we've grown closer to each other and grown to understand each other more, coming to a place where I can be like, okay, this has bothered me for a couple of days. I tried to put it out of my mind and now it's not. And if I don't tell Eric this, he can't read my mind. He doesn't know that I'm irritated that we haven't had a real conversation in a few days. He's exhausted from work. So I had to tell him, and not being afraid to just communicate those things in a loving way, like your dad says, in the right time, manner, and place.
Yep. Very important. Time, manner, place. And I agree with all those things. And yeah, I look forward to talking more about their relationship dynamics when maybe one person isn't opening up as much. And I think that's for the next podcast.
That's right. Okay, y'all. I told Eric that he could leave the marriage corner, aka the corner of my office that we record in. But I was like, I have got to stay up here and find that quote, because I know that one of my podcast guests this season quoted it. And so I wanted to look it up. It's from Esther Perel, which I had never heard of until she mentioned her. She said she's not a believer. So, take some of the stuff you read about her and some of the stuff with a grain of salt. But she said, apparently part of the quote was, most people are going to have 2 or 3 marriages, which is really sad. So ignore that part, because as believers, we are committing before God and before the church and before man that, our marriage is forever, in sickness and in health. And truly, like, I've shared this before, but I really do feel like marriage is under attack in our current culture. And it's really sad to me that the stats show that the divorce rates are the same in the church as in the world. And it should not look that way. So that's why I'm so excited about this whole season of the marriage podcast and really getting into it with you guys. And obviously there are biblical grounds for divorce, and you can talk with your pastor or anyone else about that if you need to go into depths. We never encourage you to stay in a harmful relationship. Physical abuse, obviously those kind of things are. But it says most people are going to have 2 or 3 marriages, 2 or 3 committed relationships in their adult life. It's just that some of us are going to do it with the same person. So essentially getting at that idea that the person that you're marrying is going to have 2 or 3 different, personalities or versions of them because we are unique individuals that God has created, and we grow, hopefully, and the Lord keeps changing us to be more like him as we pursue him throughout our lives, and especially in the calling of marriage. So with all that said, I hope that you left today encouraged and that you can really look and have this conversation with your spouse. What do you feel like has changed the most throughout your marriage, and what has been positive? What do you maybe want to be working on together? And, how do you see yourself continuing to change as a person who's seeking to be more like Christ and therefore unified together by both pursuing him at the top of that, triangle that they typically show us in premarital counseling? God at the top, your husband on one side, you on the other side, pursuing him. It brings you closer together. Such an awesome picture always, if you haven't seen that. But anyway, I love this episode. I'm really grateful for Eric, and I'm really grateful for you guys for tuning in. And thank you, Sarah, for this fun question. Thanks again. Bye. Okay, friend, that's a wrap on this week's episode. If you're not already following me on Instagram, make sure to screenshot this episode, share it to your stories, and tag @Healthy by Heather Brown so I can connect with you in my DMs. It truly brings me so much joy to see how these episodes impact you. Make sure to subscribe so we can see you back here next Tuesday for our weekly show. In case you don't know, your downloads, ratings, and reviews are the actual lifeblood of this podcast, and it helps spread the word to your friends and family. So please hit the download button on this episode and leave a 5-star rating if you super loved it. And if we're really BFFs, you'll spread the happy and text this podcast link to someone who needs to hear it today for some encouragement. Scroll down to the show notes on this episode to see any and all links mentioned, freebies to fuel your health goals, prayer-related episodes, and the 7-day free trial of my exclusive membership where I personally coach and cheer you on in whole health. While you're there, make sure to check out my Amazon storefront with healthy snacks, my favorite look for less workout outfits, and books and devotionals that challenge me in my faith. If you ever need to find my Amazon storefront, just Google Healthy by Heather Brown Amazon and it will come up. Have a great day, girl gang.